So we're here with Chief Joe Pierre this evening. I'm going to tell you a bit about Joe in just a moment. My name is Ian Shanahan. I'm with Green Teacher. This is the fourth of our four-part autumn series that we've dubbed the Outdoor Learning Series, and it's specifically about activities that educators of all kinds in all settings can use outdoors. Certainly at a time of physical distancing, being outdoors is something that a lot of us are looking to as a solution. And in partnership with Columbia Basin Environmental Education Network, CBEN, we decided to put together this autumn webinar series. And we're very excited to cap the series off this evening. Just a little bit about Green Teacher. Many of you probably know about us. We produce a quarterly magazine. The latest issue just came out in September, and we have our next coming out shortly before the December holiday break. We also have numerous books about greening school grounds, teaching about climate change, invasive species, and so on. Particularly right now, our focus is on the climate change books. Check out our website, greenteacher.com. All proceeds go back into the nonprofit and support activities like this webinar series. We also, in the summer, launched a podcast, Talking with Green Teachers, wherein we're discussing some of the big ideas in environmental education as a whole and engaging with underrepresented voices within the field. We just dropped our latest episode earlier this week. Check that out, also on our website. All the episodes are open source. We have numerous webinar partners that we're very thankful for spreading the word about our webinar series. Here you can see our webinar partners across Canada. We also have many webinar partners in the United States, and again, we thank all of them for spreading the word and allowing us to engage with as many people as possible with this webinar series. And our feature webinar partner, they've been our partner for all of our webinars in this fall outdoor learning series, is the Columbia Basin Environmental Education Network. They've been a wonderful support and partner, and thank you very much to them. They're also affiliated with the Outdoor Learning Store. If you're in BC, check out the Outdoor Learning Store. If you're in the rest of Canada, the Outdoor Learning Store will be Canada-wide early in the new year. And for those joining in the United States, just so that nobody feels left out, I always recommend BioQuip, a wonderful organization as well based in California. Let's hear about our presenter this evening, Joe Pierre. Joe is a citizen of the Ktunaxa Nation. He attended the University of Calgary in the Fine Arts. At the University of Calgary, Joe met several other First Nations people interested in theater, and they collaborated together to form the Crazy Horse Theater Company. The company mounted several productions in Calgary, all of which were written by Aboriginal writers. Joe also worked for a season with the CBC production North of 60. Joe was a storyteller at the very first Proctor Storytelling Festival, and he has presented at several other festivals throughout the Kootenays. Currently, he is employed by School District 5, Southeast Kootenay, and is a member of the Board of Directors for the First Nations Education Steering Committee. Joe served as the counselor for the St. Mary's Indian Band for 8 years and was a member of the Board of Governors for the College of the Rookies for 6 years. In the fall of 2016, Joe was elected back to the council, this time in the capacity of Chief Counselor. He is a husband to wife Jennifer and a father to 14-year-old Jude. Together, they are known as Triple J, and we have one member of Triple J with us this evening. That is Joe Pierre. Take it away, Joe.
Ki sokyukiet kapineskech. Ho sokelkokani now sanmietki. Ho sokelkokani now sanmietki. So ki sokyukiet is the Ktunaxa way of saying good day. So good day to all of you. Kapineskech in our language is everyone. So I'm saying good day to each and every one of you. The next thing that I said using the language was Ho sukelkokani now sanmietki. And I actually said it twice. And the reason why I said it twice is because that word that I first used, Ho sukelkokani, when I was just a young boy learning Ktunaxa language from my grandparents, Malian and Andrew, my grandmother taught me that Ho sukelkokani is how we Ktunaxa say, I am happy, or how we express that we are happy. And so when I say Ho sukelkokani now sanmietki, what I'm saying is I am happy today. But later on in life, when I was in my 30s, I was in my early 30s actually, there was a gathering of the Ktunaxa Nation, and the call went out to Ktunaxa people all over to gather together, to come together. And the reason for this gathering was to talk about the Ktunaxa language. And so this gathering was called the Ktunaxa Language Symposium. And so Ktunaxa people came from all around to gather and talk about our language. And it was a 2-day gathering, and it happened at the St. Eugene Mission, which is a part of my home community of Akam. And so the gathering was at the St. Eugene, and there were Ktunaxa from all over that came. And the first day was really dedicated to the elders. It was the elders who were speaking on that first day. Those of us who were younger, we were really just deferring to our elders, and anything that, any conversation that was going to happen about the language that day, well, we really thought that, it was the elders that needed to speak first. And so that first day was dedicated to them. And then on the second day, other people started to stand up. Those of us who were younger at that time, those of us who maybe aren't fluent speakers of the language, but can use the language and understand. We started to stand up and speak. And then there was this one young fella, and I'm going to call him a young fella because at the time, I believe he was in his 20s. And so this young fella, he stood up, and he was actually there. He had come up from the United States. And so he started speaking, and what he said was, I know that you Kootenays up there in the north. And he used that word Kootenays because Kootenay is the English name or English word for Ktunaxa. We Ktunaxa people. In our language, we call ourselves Ktunaxa, but in English, we're known as Kootenays. And so he said, I know that you Kootenays up there in the north, you say Nasuʔkin when you want to say that you're happy. I know this too. I learned that too when I was growing up. This young man was sharing with us. And then he went on to say, I just wanted to let you know that we Kootenays down there in the south, we say Nasuʔkin in a different way too. We say Nasuʔkin if we want to express gratitude or if we want to say thank you. And he used an example. He said, like, for example, say someone has done something for you and it's made you happy. And so you want to express to them that you're happy. And so you would say to them, Nasuʔkin. But it's also a way of saying thank you, Nasuʔkin. And so I learned that day that, we have in Ktunaxa these, different ways of using our language throughout our territory. And so this young man from down south taught me another way to use that word. And ever since that time, I have always said, Nasuʔkin Nasuʔkin twice, because I do want to express that I'm happy today. I am happy today, Nasuʔkin Nasuʔkin, but I'm also very grateful today, Nasuʔkin Nasuʔkin. I'm so grateful for this opportunity to be speaking with all of you this evening. And I'm so grateful for such a beautiful day. It was a beautiful day today. I'm grateful to my wife and my child for everything that they do for me. And I'm grateful, I think mostly right now, I want to express gratitude towards my mother. The other night, my family, we experienced just a little bit of a scare from my mom. The ambulance had to come and get her and bring her to the hospital, but everything's okay. She's back home now. But we did experience just, that little bit of a scare. And so I'm just so grateful to my mom, and I want to express that in front of everybody. I want to let everybody know that I'm just so grateful to my mom and what she has done for me all my years, all my life. So these are the things that make me happy, and these are the things that I'm grateful for today. And so I've started speaking a little bit about who I am and where I'm from. As was said in the introduction by Ian, I am a Ktunaxa Nation citizen. I consider myself to be Ktunaxa first, and foremost. I am Canadian. I am a Canadian Ktunaxa, because there are Ktunaxa on both sides of the border. For those of you who might not know maybe where I'm actually situated or located right now, I'm actually in the town of Cranbrook, BC. I do know that there were to be people coming to the webinar, from all parts of our country. So I'm not exactly sure where everybody's from, but what I want to let you know is that I am coming to you right now from Cranbrook, British Columbia. So I'm right in that southeast corner of British Columbia, right by the Rocky Mountains. I'm in the Rocky Mountains, close to Alberta, but also Montana and Idaho. And I want to acknowledge, my cousins, the other Ktunaxa people who live on the other side of the border. There are Ktunaxa people in Montana. There are Ktunaxa people in Idaho. And so these are my homelands. This is the place where I'm speaking to you from. And so I just want you to have in mind, that idea of the Rocky Mountains. This is where I'm situated. In the Ktunaxa language, we call Cranbrook Akiskak'it. Akiskak'it is the name for this place where I am right now. Akiskak'it. I've been told by different elders a couple of different meanings for that word, Akiskak'it. At one time, I had an elder share with me that Akiskak'it, that name, that place, that people call Cranbrook now, we call it Akiskak'it. It means the place where the two creeks meet, is what one of my elders told me when I was growing up. But I had another elder tell me one time, Akiskak'it, it's that place where the two valleys meet. But again, it's that idea of translating a language into another language. And, so in English, though, the place where the two valleys meet, or the place where the two creeks meet. If you know anything about the mountains, in the bottom of most valleys, we're going to find water moving, right? And so that place where the two creeks meet, Akiskak'it. And so that's where I am today. And so I want you to keep that in mind while I'm speaking today, just that understanding of maybe what you know about this part of the world, if you've ever been to this part of the world in the Rocky Mountains. I have mentioned my grandparents, and I want to talk to you a little bit about them before I share the story that I'm going to share with you this evening. And the reason why I do this is that it was my grandfather, specifically my grandfather, Andrew Michel, who was the first to start sharing Ktunaxa stories with me when I was just a little boy. Now, the thing about Andrew, though, is that Andrew was not my biological grandfather. Andrew was my mom's stepdad. When my mother was born, on her birth certificate, her mom's name, Marion Eustace. Dad's name, unknown. Father's name, unknown. And so what happened for my mom when she was a little girl is that this man who was her biological father was just not in her life. He did not know her. She did not know him. He was of, I will say, Celtic ancestry, because, again, not exactly sure Scottish or Irish, but from that part of the world. And so that gentleman was not a part of my mom's life. She never ever knew him. What happened, though, was that when she was a little girl, this man by the name of Andrew did come into her life. And Andrew became the partner of my biological grandmother, Marianne Michel. Marianne was a Ktunaxa woman. She had Ktunaxa parents, grandparents. Andrew was a Ktunaxa man. He had Ktunaxa parents, grandparents. And they came together when my mom was just a little girl. And so my mom always referred to Andrew as her stepdad. She always called my stepdad or my stepfather Andrew. I never ever called him step-grandpa. He was my grandpa. I called him grandpa, my grandpa Andrew. Now, one of the unique things about this relationship between Andrew and Marianne is that there was actually quite an age difference between the two of them. Now, my grandmother, Malian, she was born in 1922. Andrew was born in 1891. He was 31 years older than my grandmother. And so he was in his 60s when they came together. She was in her 30s. And he very much embraced my mother as his own child, and my mom embraced him as her dad. But this man, Andrew, that I call Grandpa, that I refer to as Grandpa, really was more like great grandpa age for me, if that makes any sense. You know, I think that grandparents, you know, when you first become grandparents, you're in your 50s or your 60s. But this gentleman, he was in his 80s when he was my grandpa, when I was calling him Grandpa, because I didn't really get to know him or become to know him until the early 1970s. I was born in 1968, 2 years before the residential school closed down in my community, because there is a residential school in my community, and it did not close until 1970. And so I missed going to that school just by 3 years. Had that school still been open, I would have went to residential school as well. My mom went to that residential school. But this man, Andrew, the one that I called Grandpa, you know, I'm just a little boy and he's in his 80s, born in 1891. Those of you who know anything about the Kootenays, just outside of Cranbrook here, there's this tiny little heritage town that is called Fort Steele. And if you've ever been out to Fort Steele, if you know what I'm talking about, you know what they're trying to depict there is life and times here in the Kootenays in 1892. 1892 is kind of the date that they hinge on at Fort Steele. Well, that's when my grandpa was 1 year old. He was already born. And so the stories that I tell, I first heard from this man, Andrew Michel, when my sister and I were just little kids. We would be with our grandparents, Andrew and Malian, my mom's mom. And we would be somewhere out in the mountains. We were always out in the mountains with them. I was sharing with you about my grandparents, my grandfather especially, because I want you all to know where these stories come from for me. It was my grandfather really that gave me these stories when I was just a young boy, and I'm so grateful to him. And so I'm always wanting to talk about him and storytell just about him. I was talking about my sister and I being with our grandparents, my grandfather Andrew and my grandmother Malian. So we spent a lot of time with them. And the reason why we spent a lot of time with them is when my sister and I were just little, our parents split up. My dad needed to do some things on his own. And so my sister and I stayed with our mom. We stayed in that community of Akam with our mom. And so my mom relied on her mom, Malian, to help, with Cindy and I, my sister and I. And so my sister and I ended up spending a lot of time with our grandparents, Malian and Andrew. One of the things that we used to do with them was we used to go around the Ktunaxa Nation to all the different communities in the Ktunaxa Nation, visiting people, visiting other elders around the nation. And so some of those elders that come to mind are elders that are down in the Montana area, elders who are no longer with us, but that I very, very much remember meeting as a young boy. Names that stand out for me are Elder Mary Andrews. I really remember Mary. My grandmother and Mary were great friends, and we used to see her a lot. There's another couple, I knew them as Alec and Adeline. Alec's last name was Left Hand, and Adeline Matthias, two elders from the Elmo, Montana area. And another older fella by the name of Joe Antisse. I remember him as an elder growing up in the 1970s. And so these are elders when I was just a little boy in the 1970s, folks that, had been around for their lifetime through last century. They had experienced all of the colonization that happened last century. These are elders that, when they were first born and growing up, Ktunaxa would have been their first language, their mother tongue. And so I remember meeting all of these folks with my grandparents when we used to travel around, and I remember all of the storytelling that used to happen. And in the 1970s, when I was just a young boy, there was an effort to record our stories. Lots of recordings were being done on reel-to-reel tapes. Our elders were being recorded, being asked if they could remember the stories that they used to hear before they went to residential school, those stories that their grandparents used to tell them. And there's a committee down in Montana with the Ktunaxa down in Montana known as the Kootenai Culture Committee. And so some of these elders that I've mentioned, knowing when I was a little boy, like Mary Andrews and Alec Left Hand, they were sources of information for the Kootenai Culture Committee back then. And one of the efforts that they undertook was the writing of a book. And back then, the first book that came out, it was called Kootenai Legends. Because again, remember that was that English word for Ktunaxa is Kootenai. And so that book came out, it was called Kootenai Legends. Now, there have been other editions of that book that have come out over the years, and the one that I am familiar with is Ktunaxa Legends. And so all of the stories that are in that book, are credited back to some of those elders that I've been talking about. And so the story that I'm going to share with you tonight is in that Ktunaxa Legends book. I do remember hearing this story directly from elders like my grandfather and people like Adeline Matthias. And so that's the story I'm going to share with you this evening, is can be found in that book. It's a story that takes place a long time ago. My grandmother, whenever she used to tell stories like this, she would say it's a story that takes place in a time before there were Nasuʔkin here on this earth. Nasuʔkin are the human beings. And so this is a story that takes place in a time before the human beings, when the Nasuʔkin, when the animals, when the Nasuʔkin ruled the world. And at this time, long, long time ago, Numa, that's our Ktunaxa name for thunder, Numa had a presence upon the earth. Numa had a form, thunder had a form here on the earth. And so there was this creature known as Numa that lived here. Thunder lived upon the earth. And thunder had lots of power. Thunder had two sons, and his boys, the Thunder Boys, were very powerful as well. One of their great powers was their speed. Oh, the Thunder Boys were quick. They were fast. And Numa, Thunder, used to love to challenge. He had a standing challenge, in fact, out to all the other creatures, all the other spirits and creatures, that if anybody wanted to race against his boys, they could come and race against his boys. And that they would wager. But Numa would always say, I don't wager just anything. If you're going to come and race against my boys, we're going to wager our lives. If you can beat my boys, well, then you can put me and my boys into the fire. But if my boys beat you, well, then you're going to go in the fire. And so there was this standing challenge out to all of the spirits and creatures, the Nasuʔkin. And they would come and they would challenge Thunder. And Thunder's boys, they always won. They always won those races. And then Thunder would make an offer. Well, you've lost. You know the bet. You know the rules. We're going to take your life now. You're going to go in that fire. Or, if you'd like, we can forego the fire, but you will become my slave. And so lots of the spirits and the creatures took this option. And so Thunder actually had quite a large village. They were all his slaves. They were all his captives. They were ones that had lost to the Thunder Boys. Now at this time, Coyote, Skinkoots, and Fox, Nakyu. That's our Ktunaxa names for those two. Skinkoots and Nakyu, the coyote and the fox. They lived together. They were brothers and they lived together. And Skinkoots and Nakyu, they had some sons of their own. They each had two boys, the coyote boys and the fox brothers. And they lived together. Well, they got word, they found out, they heard about Numa, Thunder, and the Thunder Boys and what they were doing. And Fox didn't really think this was a very good thing. It wasn't a good thing what Numa was doing, Fox thought. Taking people's lives or else taking them as slaves for themselves. Fox didn't really like this. And he thought, my boys are pretty quick. And he said to his brother, Coyote, your boys are pretty quick too. We should maybe think about challenging those Thunder Boys to a race. Maybe we might have something and we could win and finally put an end to what Thunder is doing. Yeah. Oh, that sounds like a good idea. That's a great idea. Coyote loved it. Let's go today. Let's go tonight, in fact. Let's go and let's challenge them to a race. Fox, Nakyu, right away said, No. I think we need to make sure that our sons have their power. We should send them out into the world to look for their power before they go up against the Thunder Boys. Oh, maybe that's a good idea. Yeah, maybe we should send our boys out into the world to find their power. And so they got their sons ready for that journey out into the world. And those boys were told, you are to go away now for 1 year and a day. You are to stay away for a full year and a day. You go out there and you will find your powers. And so the Fox boys went off and the Coyote boys went off out into the world. And they were gone for 1 whole year and a day. Now, while they were gone, that whole time they were gone, every once in a while, Nakyu, the fox, would get down his pipe from where he keeps his pipe, and he would load up his pipe, and he would have a few smokes, and he would be praying to the Great Spirit, asking the Great Spirit to show him where his boys were. And he always knew that his boys were doing okay. And so they would check in that way every once in a while, just make sure that they're doing okay. And a year and a day passed by. And now Nakyu and Skinkoots are waiting. They know that it's been a year and a day, and the boys should be coming home. They should be home any time soon now. And they hear a noise outside. And so they go and they take a look. And it's the oldest fox boy, the oldest fox brother has shown up back to the teepee. And he's tired. He's looking really, really tired. And they tell him, come in. And so as he's coming into the teepee, they take a look at that oldest fox boy. And he's got this mark across his forehead. It's this color of red mark across his forehead. And he's holding on to just a branch. And it's a branch of a tree that they both recognize. Oh, yeah, we know that tree that he's got there. And look at that mark on his head. I think he's found some power. And so they tell that fox to smoke himself, and they welcome him back home. And then they hear some more noise outside again. And so they go and they take a look, and this time it's the older coyote boy. The older coyote brother has shown up, and he too is tired, and they help him inside the house. And as he comes into the teepee, they look at him and they see on his forehead is this one single arrow on his forehead pointing up towards the sky. And he too is carrying a branch in his hand. And they recognize that tree where the branch came from. And they look and they see he's got a mark on his forehead. He too has found some power. And so Coyote is happy and proud of his boy. And again, there's more noise outside. And this time it's the youngest of the two Coyote brothers. The young Coyote brother, Skincoot's brother, has showed up. And when they look at him, he has 7 arrows on his forehead. 7 of them. And they're all pointing up. And in his hands, he's got tree branches, lots of them, a bunch of them. And so he has received the medicines from those trees, those bushes, and he has received his power. And so Coyote is very happy for his youngest boy. And now they're just waiting for that young Nasuʔkin, the young fox, to get home. He's the last one. And again, they hear some noise outside, so they look. And there he is. It's the young fox boy. And he has 7 colors wiped across his forehead. It's the 7 colors of the rainbow. He's got the rainbow right across his forehead. All these colors of the rainbow on his forehead. And right away, his dad, Nasuʔkin, the fox, realizes, oh, my boy has received a great power. And look in his hands. Look at the branches that he has in his hands. They're from trees that they had never seen before. They had never seen leaves or branches like that ever before. And so they thought, that young fox, he's received lots of power. Now, the reason why they couldn't recognize some of these branches that the young fox was holding on to is because these branches, these leaves, these medicines that he had gathered had come from different parts of the world. He talked to them and told them how he actually traveled all the way around the world while he was gone. And that's why he had so many different types of branches and leaves from all around the world. He had collected the different medicines, and he had received lots of power on his journey. And so, Coyote, right away, well, I guess tomorrow we can go and challenge that Thunder. Hey, Thunder and his boys, because our boys are home now. Let's go tomorrow. I think tomorrow would be a good day. And Nasuʔkin the fox, knowing, no. We should maybe give the boys a few days to rest, get their energy back. We should be patient. Okay. And so they let the brothers rest for a few days. And a day comes where Fox says, well, I think it's time we should head over to the Thunder Village and go and challenge Thunder's boys to this race. Let's head out. And so they pack up and they head out for the Thunder Village, for Numa's village. It takes them the day to make the journey. And so they make the outskirts of the Thunder Village just before nightfall. And Nasuʔkin says, let's wait here. Let's make a camp here for the night. Tomorrow morning, we'll go down into the village and challenge them to this race. Okay. So they make their camp and they spend the evening. The next morning, nice and good and bright and early, they get up and it's time to go down to the Thunder Village to challenge them to this race. And so here they come, the coyotes and the fox, and they're approaching the village. And as they're getting close to the village, the fox lets out a nice loud howl, "Ow, ow, 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 ow," just to let Numa know that they're coming. Numa hears this howl. That sounds like Fox. Fox and Coyote must be here. It must be time for them to challenge my boys. Oh, can't wait to race against them. And as they're approaching the village, just right on the outskirts of the village, is that old grandmother Watak, the old grandmother frog. She has her lodge just on the edge of the village, and she sees those coyotes and those foxes coming. Oh, you, stay away from here. This is not a good place. Numa's bad. He'll kill you if you lose that race. But they just ignore the old grandma frog's warnings, and they go into the village. And when they see Numa, right away, Coyote runs up to Numa. Hey, we're here to challenge you. We have our boys. Our boys are really quick. We want to challenge your boys to a race. Well, all right then. Okay. That sounds like a good idea. And Nasuʔkin, the fox, says, I brought with us a really nice blanket. We'd like to bet this blanket against your boys that we can win this race. No, I don't bet for trivial little things like a blanket. We're going to bet for our lives. That's the bet. If your boys win, then you can throw me and my boys into the fire. But if my boys win, all of you are going to go in the fire. Oh, okay. If that's the way the bet is, okay, that's what we'll do. And so they make their bet. And then Coyote says, so the course of the race, I think we should start here, maybe go around that mountain and come back here to the start. No, that's not where we race. We race around the world. If you want to race against my boys, the race is around the world, once around the world and back here, not around that mountain. Oh, okay. That will be the race. Then we'll race once around the world. And so the boys are told to get themselves ready. Off into the bush they go to get themselves ready. And when they come back out of the bush, they are all naked except for those marks on their foreheads. That older fox brother has that one mark of red on his forehead, and he's ready for the race. That older coyote has his one arrow on his forehead pointing up, and he's ready for the race. That younger coyote has all 7 of his arrows on his forehead, and he's ready for the race. And that young fox has his rainbow across his forehead, and he's ready for the race. When Numa sees the rainbow on the forehead of that young fox, he's a little bit worried. Oh no, it looks like that young fox might have the power of the rainbow. Oh no. And they're told that the race is going to happen all the way around the world. And what will happen is that those creatures that fly the highest, those ones that fly, that spend their days way high up in the sky with the good vision, with the good eyes, those ones are going to spread out around the world, and they will watch the race from on high, and they will send reports back on how the race is progressing. And so those ones that spend their days way high up in the sky, they fly up as high as they can, and they spread out around the world, and they get ready to report on the race. And there's Ktunaxa now, there's creatures, there's animals from all around that have gathered. They've heard about the race, and they've all come to watch the race. And the 6 of them line up, and someone says, go. And off they go running. The race is on. And those ones that fly high up in the sky are keeping an eye on the race, and they're sending reports back. And so the race is fast and furious right now, with the Thunder Boys out front, followed very, very closely by the Fox brothers, and then followed right close behind them by the Coyote boys. And they're racing around the world. They've gone about a quarter of the way around the world now, and the Thunder Boys are still out front, and the Fox brothers are right there close behind, and the Coyote boys, oh, they're keeping up. They're still in this race. The race is going all the way around the world. And now, about halfway around the world, those ones that fly high up in the sky are starting to report back. They're on their way back now. They're coming back. And the race is still still in front are those Thunder Boys. But on that way back, that young Fox brother starts to call upon his power, the power of the rainbow, and he starts to get quicker and quicker. And as the rainbow power comes more and more to that young Fox brother, he passes the Thunder Boys. And the Thunder Boys can't believe what they've just seen. Nobody has ever been in front of them, ever before. They've always been the quickest. But this young fox, the power of the rainbow is now pushing him along. He's not even running on the ground anymore. He's just flying through the air, flying with the power of the rainbow. And the thunder is doing as best it can to catch up to that rainbow. Thunder Boys are starting to get angry that they can't catch up. And so they start making their sound. Their thunder sound is coming out, and they start to throw lightning bolts at that young fox. But that young fox just cannot be caught. The power of the rainbow is behind him, pushing him along. And sure enough, that young fox with the power of the rainbow beats the Thunder Boys. And right away, Numa knows that he's lost. He knows that his boys have been beat. Coyote, hey, aren't you supposed to be in that fire? You should be in that fire already. Why aren't you in that fire yet? Oh, please, just give me a moment to say goodbye to my sons. And Nasuʔkin the fox says, yes, Coyote, just give him a moment. Let him go say their goodbyes. And I know that Numa will be honorable. He will go into that fire on his own, but you just let them say goodbye to one another. And so Numa says goodbye to his two boys. And he says, you follow me into this fire now. And Numa goes into the fire, and the boys go into the fire. And as they're burning up, that sound that we know as thunder today starts to come out of that fire. That sound that we know as Numa, as thunder today, starts to spread out around the world. And Coyote and Fox say to Numa, there's going to be a time coming soon, very, very soon, there's going to be a time when the human beings are here on the earth. From now on, Numa, the human beings will only know you as being that sound up there in the sky. You will no longer kill like you once used to. But, Numa, if you ever hear any one of those Nasuʔkin or those human beings speaking badly of you, then you can take their lives. And so this is what the Ktunaxa believe, that that we should not be speaking badly of thunder, ever. We should never say bad things about the thunder. We Ktunaxa believe that the rainbow is one of the greatest powers that there is. The rainbow for the Ktunaxa people is one of our great powers. And so that story, like I said, it can be found in that book, the Ktunaxa Legends book. I do remember it being shared with me by those old elders that I talked about earlier in my journeys around with my grandparents. And I'm so happy to be able to share that story with you today. One of my biggest reasons for wanting to share that story today with you is, well, just thinking about Green Teacher and this group of people who might come together for an organization like Green Teacher. I know that I'm probably speaking to a lot of environmental educators, people who maybe grew up like myself, being very much attached to the outdoors. I think that this is likely the group of people that I'm speaking to right now. And so I wanted to share with you that idea of preparing young people for their journeys in life. At the beginning of the story, those young ones are sent out into the world to find their power. And I just so much believe in this idea of our young ones being out in the world and taking a look around, searching for power and for knowledge. I love that idea of the more places you go, the more that you know. And so I really believe that is kind of a message that is coming from this story. I know that young fox, when it's talked about, he's got all these plants, all these different medicines from around the world, it's plants and medicines that we wouldn't know about here in the homelands of the Ktunaxa. Plants and medicines that would maybe only ever be in, say, a desert or maybe in the tropical area. And so I really love this idea, of thinking about sending our young people out into the world to have a good look, and to come home with things in their hands, things in their pockets. Look at what I found. Look at this. Look at that. The different powers that they might be able to find out there in the world. Another reason why I wanted to share this story with you this evening is just that message of the power in what I will call diversity, or that power of the rainbow. It's not lost on me that the LGBT community chooses the rainbow as their symbol. And so I wanted to just talk this evening a little bit about that idea of diversity and the power in diversity. I think that we Ktunaxa absolutely do believe in that. We through our storytelling, believe that all of us Nasuʔkin, all of us human beings, come from the same place. And that, there are things that do differentiate us. And that mostly has to do with geography and where we might find ourselves in the world. That gives us our worldview. That gives us our powers, our different powers. The different types of power that might come from the oceans, or the different types of power that might come from the mountains, if you're a mountain person like me. And so I wanted to bring those ideas to you this evening. I also wanted to bring to you the idea of place and the importance of place. I think that it's so important when you think about that idea of being in a place and remaining in that place, knowing that your young ones are out there in the world. Having that anchor of a place that's home. And so for me, when I send my son out there into the world to find his power, I will be anchored here at home in place in the Kootenays, in these mountains. And I want you all to think about, the place where you may be this evening, wherever that might be on this continent. I don't know where you find yourself this evening. I know that our host, Ian, is way over there in Ontario right now, this evening. He's in a completely different time zone and a different type of geography. And to think about, if I was to send my young person out into the world, just outside right here, wherever your home might be, what kind of branches might they come home with? What kind of things might they find that are just local, And so those are some of the ideas that I wanted to bring to you this evening. I also just wanted to bring that idea of really trying to anchor you or give you that sense of place of where I am through my storytelling. And to know that all over North America, all over what we Indigenous people refer to as Turtle Island. That's a term that I know from the Eastern, I believe it's an Ojibwe term originally, from their storytelling. They have a story where they talk about the world being all covered in water at one time, and how this woman fell to the earth. And when she splashed down on the earth, she needed somewhere to be. And so it was the turtle that volunteered and said, "Hey, you can put that woman on my back. I'll carry her." And eventually they turned that turtle into an island. And that turtle today is what we call Turtle Island or North America. And so just knowing that all over, all the different parts of North America have an Indigenous people, have an Indigenous storytelling, have this idea of power and things that can be found in your own place where you are, just by going out and looking. And so my suggestion for everyone is to put your ear to the ground and find out, see who it is that's local to you, wherever you are, that shares stories like what I share, that has connections to the grandparents, the elders, the old people from, not so long ago, really, actually. It seems like it was 100 years ago because it was last century, but that's not so long ago, really. There are folks out there who are connected to their elders, like myself. So, Ian, I think maybe do we want to do some questions now? Like I I am willing to take some questions from a few folks if anybody has any questions. But otherwise, that's kind of what I wanted to share this evening. So I'll leave it there, Ian. I'll put it in your hands again.
Well, thank you very much, Joe. And it's an air virtual clapping.
Yeah.
So we will certainly take some questions, as Joe has so generously offered. And I just want to share a comment that Juliet has shared in the chat box here. She says, interestingly, my daughter came and sat next to me with a snail from the garden as you were speaking.
Cool. So she brought something in from outside. I love it.
Yeah. I know, and folks, if you do have questions, by all means, throw them into the chat box, and I'll relay those to Joe. I know when you and I spoke last week, Joe, you talked about the idea of sharing stories, and the term you used was citing sources.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. It's really what I was trying to do. I guess I was trying to model, as being a storyteller, that for me, it's so important to acknowledge how or where a story might have come from for you when you're telling story. And so I absolutely believe that as a storyteller, what I've just done in telling you the story or sharing with you the story is that I've literally done just that. I've shared it with you. And so in the sense of sharing, now that story is with you, and it can be shared again. In fact, that's the nature of story. That's what we as human beings do with story. And so I'm guessing that you may share that story again with someone. And if you can just remember to kind of cite that source, where did it come from? It's a Ktunaxa story. I heard this storyteller by the name of Pierre. And I think that that's just so important, is that, if you're wanting to bring Indigenous story into your classrooms or into the groups that you teach as an environmental educator, is just to be mindful of the source of the story and the nation of the story. I'm glad to know that my Ktunaxa story might be shared on the other side of this Turtle Island. I think that would be cool. Acknowledge the place where you're at. If you're up in Haida Gwaii, well then, I want to acknowledge that we're on the homelands of the Haida. I'm going to share a story from Ktunaxa today, but I want to acknowledge the homelands of the Haida before I share this Ktunaxa story with you. That kind of idea for sharing story. And so I always cite my sources. I always talk about my grandparents. And I always think about all those old people who've shared stories with me. But just that idea, though, too, that to know that in my heart, I was sharing with you this evening. I very much mean that. I was sharing with you, and so I'm okay with you sharing the story with other people if you'd like. Yeah. I think that's what we were talking about, Ian. That's what you were referring to?
For sure. I know
Yeah.
if a story has not come from a particular community or nation, some people may feel reticent about sharing it. And I think you've explained very well about how a story is meant as a gift, and it is meant to be shared. And
Sure.
as many of us are used to in academia, if you say where it's from, that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
There is a question from Candace asking about Grandmother Frog, and is she in other stories?
Yeah, actually, Grandmother Frog is a character that does show up in other stories, and I think in this one, she shows up there just kind of maybe as that voice of reason, because really what is happening, just the whole idea of that kind of race that's actually happening, and people's or characters still coming to take part in that race. I really do think that grandmother is there kind of as that voice of reason. There's a really beautiful little story that has Grandmother Frog and Kutsats, which is the chipmunk, living with her. And Kutsats, is living with her Grandmother Frog, for reasons that I don't know. I was never told, when I was little, but Kutsats is living with grandmother. And Ktunaxa goes out and gets into a little bit of trouble and has to run home to find security and safety with grandma. But this trouble that she is attracted back to the lodge is actually Kupi, the owl, has followed that little chipmunk back to the lodge. And so grandmother tries to protect chipmunk by hiding her, but that owl is able to find her, and that owl eventually does eat the chipmunk. Blah, 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 blah. So that chipmunk is gone. But what that owl does when it eats that chipmunk is it doesn't eat the bones, and it just leaves the bones on the floor. And so after the owl leaves, grandmother frog, grandmother Watak takes up those bones and puts the bones of that chipmunk back together again. And when the bones are all back together, well then Ktunaxa, the chipmunk, comes back to life. And so that's one of my favorite stories with grandmother frog, grandmother Watak, because I just love the idea of the healing hands or the healing touch of grandma. I really like that idea. Yeah. So yes, thank you for that question. Grandmother frog does show up in our legends and stories, and very powerful from time to time. I do know, though, sometimes in some stories, unfortunately for grandmother Watak, she can just kind of be overlooked or overrun, overruled, that kind of thing. Poor grandma. Yeah.
All right, and just to answer a technical question is we will indeed be sharing the recording of this webinar on our website. It will be free to view for 30 days, so a full month, and thereafter for subscribers to Green Teacher. So if you know of anyone who had registered or even didn't register and weren't able to attend the live session, the recording will be up tomorrow. And we will also send a follow-up email just with any of the resources that were mentioned, particularly in the chat box. And that way, if you were trying to take notes and weren't able to, we'll include all of that in the follow-up email. And Joanna's just asking, is it possible to get a copy of the Legends book? Is that available, Joe,
Yeah,
or do you know where it might be?
I'm not sure just how widely distributed it is anymore. I do know that there was, at least in my memory, the last edition of it that came out was in the early 2000s. I'm not sure if it's still being printed right now, but it is referred to as the Ktunaxa Legends book. Ktunaxa Legends is actually what it's called. So Ktunaxa for Ktunaxa Legends. Yeah, I don't believe that it's actually in print anymore right now. Hopefully, with the movement of things here in British Columbia now, with the Ministry of Education, really mandating Indigenous content in the curriculum, maybe we might consider another printing of that book again. But too, also, that's really up to the Kootenai Culture Committee down in Montana. It's their source. So, yeah, I just think that right now in the times that we're in, storytelling and this type of storytelling that I share, I think it's important. It's important for people to remember the outside. We're being told to stay inside, stay away from people, stay home, all that kind of stuff. And I just think that this kind of storytelling and the idea of just getting outside is really what we need right now. So, yeah, it's another reason why I'm so happy to be here with you guys tonight.
That's a wonderful sentiment to finish off on, and the gratitude that is appearing just in the chat box is wonderful to see. And thank you to Samantha for including a link to Ktunaxa Legends, and Mardell for mentioning that in BC you can sometimes get the book through interlibrary loans. So thank you for everyone's contributions.
Very cool.
We always love to hear from everyone. I've just added to the chat box the SurveyMonkey link. Let us know what you think, what you would like to hear more of. Anyone who fills out the survey will be eligible for one of 2 free subscriptions to Green Teacher, a 1-year subscription to the magazine and our archive. Well, whichever time zone you were joining us from across Turtle Island, and there's also someone from New Zealand joining us, thank you so very much for being part of this community and sharing this moment across time, space, light, and dark. And we will send the follow-up tomorrow. But most importantly, thank you to Columbia Basin for their partnership in this outdoor learning series, and thank you to Joe Pierre for inspiring us, instructing us, and taking us on a journey this evening.
Thank you. I'll just leave you all with Anwinikit. It's how we say see you later in Ktunaxa. Anwinikit.